In the grand hall of the Croft family's ancestral estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, Eleanor Vance stood before a long mahogany table, looking at Grayson Croft. He pulled a printed agreement from a folder and tossed it onto the table. Grayson didn't even glance at her, his eyes glued to his phone. The engagement termination agreement. The compensation is $500,000. His voice was indifferent, as if he were reading an order from a delivery service. The engagement our grandfathers arranged in a drunken stupor was a joke to begin with. It's time to wake up. The Croft family's servants stood in the hall. The chauffeur, the housekeeper, and several relatives who had appeared from nowhere. Someone pretended to sip tea from a cup. Another leaned against the doorframe, watching the scene with interest, while another whispered to a neighbor. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her purse strap, her knuckles turning white. $500,000. The housekeeper, Anna, standing behind Grayson, curled her lips into a well-rehearsed, scornful smirk. Eleanor, that's Mr. Grayson's generosity. What's your salary? This will be enough for you to rent an apartment in Queens for 5 years, right? A few relatives snickered. A ringing filled Eleanor's ears. A wave of nausea rose in her throat. She clenched her teeth, using her last bit of strength to keep from taking a single step back. Mr. Grayson said. The housekeeper continued, her thin voice grating on the nerves like glass. That for a girl of your station, an engagement to our family was already an unprecedented stroke of luck. Now let's part peacefully, save face. Save face, Eleanor's voice, escaping from her throat, sounded alien to her. Incredibly calm. Grayson finally looked up, raising an eyebrow. His face held the impatience of someone making a charitable donation. What, not enough? Grayson, Eleanor said, I want to clarify something. He stood up, took the agreement from the table, and pushed it toward her. The pages scattered, one sliding to the floor. You're just a technician. No connections. No resources. The fact that you were associated with the Croft family for so many years, you can boast about that for the rest of your life. Don't be ungrateful. He tossed a pen onto the table. The fountain pen bounced and came to rest on the edge. Sign it, take the money and leave. The $500,000 I threw that in out of respect for your late father. Late father. The ringing in Eleanor's ears stopped. All sounds became sharp and clear. The loud ticking of the antique clock on the wall. The snip of shears as the gardener trimmed branches outside the window. The stifled chuckle of one of the relatives. She didn't bother to pick up the sheet from the floor. Grayson, she said. Her voice was quiet, but for a moment, silence fell over the hall. I have 3 questions. Grayson frowned. What questions could you possibly have? First, Eleanor interrupted him. Who was the first to propose breaking the engagement? Grayson was momentarily taken aback, but then waved his hand impatiently. Nonsense, of course it was me. Good. Second. She looked him straight in the eye. In the 5 years since our engagement, have I, Eleanor Vance, ever once sought you out? Have I ever used my status as your fiancé at any public event to gain any resources? Have I ever asked the Croft family for a single penny? Grayson opened his mouth but found nothing to say. Third, Eleanor took a half step forward. The late father you speak of died at the Northwest facility of your very own Croft Metals Corporation during the testing of a new alloy. An accident in the testing chamber. A death on the job. Not a single cent of compensation has ever been paid. Do you intend to settle your family's debt to my father with a $500,000 payoff for breaking an engagement? A dead silence fell over the hall. The housekeeper Anna's smile froze on her face. A few curious relatives exchanged glances. Someone quietly placed their cup on the table. Grayson's face turned crimson, a vein bulging in his neck. Eleanor, don't push it. Enough! A voice, elderly but commanding, boomed from the staircase. Everyone turned simultaneously. Lawrence Croft, the head of the family, leaning on a cane, was slowly descending from the second floor. At 85, the old man held his back perfectly straight, and his gaze, sharp as a knife, swept over everyone in the hall. Grayson's expression changed. Grandfather, this is between me and Eleanor. Silence. The old man said nothing more. Grayson's voice died in his throat. Lawrence Croft walked to the table, looked at the scattered agreement pages, then at the one on the floor. Then he raised his head and looked at Eleanor. Child, you've been wronged. Eleanor remained silent. Her hands were still trembling, but she hid them behind her purse so no one could see. I arranged this engagement with your father, the old man said slowly and distinctly. After your father was gone, I kept thinking of how to help you. I didn't expect this worthless grandson of mine. He glanced at Grayson, his look full of disappointment, to lack even a basic concept of dignity. Grayson's lips moved, but he didn't dare make a sound. The old man looked at Eleanor again. Grayson is breaking the engagement. What do you have to say to that? Eleanor was silent for 3 seconds. Nothing. He wants to break it. I have no objections. The old man's eyes glinted. Good, he nodded, and then suddenly changed the subject. Have you heard of my nephew? Eleanor was slightly taken aback. Grayson's expression changed too, but it wasn't anger, it was bewilderment. Grandfather, what are you talking about? I told you to be silent. The old man ordered him to be quiet for the second time, still looking only at Eleanor. I have a nephew, Julian, lead specialist at the National Materials Research Center. He just returned to New York from the Sierra Nevada facility. He paused. A deathly silence filled the hall. He's 35, 8 years older than you, still not married. The old man's cane tapped lightly on the floor. If you find him to your liking, I'll arrange everything today. The moment those words were spoken, Eleanor heard Grayson's phone fall to the floor. Grandfather. Grayson's voice changed, becoming shrill, almost a shriek. What are you saying? You want her to marry Uncle Julian? The old man didn't even turn his head. That Julian? Grayson's voice held a strange fear. He's the lead specialist at the National Center. He holds the approval for all defense materials projects. She, by what right? By what right? The old man finally turned to his grandson, his gaze icy. You just said she was unworthy? The one you deem unworthy might actually be meant for someone better. Grayson's face turned white, not from anger, but from fear. Eleanor could see it in his expression. He was afraid of Julian, deeply afraid. Julian Croft, lead specialist at the National Materials Research Center. The one who in the industry was referred to only by the title The Specialist, who never gave public interviews. A name that was whispered throughout the entire scientific community. The old man looked at her again, his tone softening. Child, I'm not forcing you. If you think it's inappropriate, or if you're afraid, just say so. The old man will find another way to help you. Eleanor looked at the old man. Her hands were no longer trembling. Mr. Croft, she began in a steady voice. If I may ask, does Julian know about this? The old man smiled slightly. He knows. Those 2 words made Eleanor's heart skip a beat. But marriage is a serious matter, not a joke, she continued, not betraying her turmoil. I would like to meet him first. The old man's smile widened. In the look he gave Eleanor, there was something akin to approval. Good. In 3 days, I will arrange a meeting for you. If you don't like him, feel free to refuse. This old man won't force you. Grayson was completely stunned. He looked back and forth between Eleanor and his grandfather, his lips moving, but he couldn't form a single coherent word. The woman he had just cast aside had, in his grandfather's words, suddenly become someone who might not appreciate the lead specialist of the National Center? Grandfather, he finally found his voice. Are you insane? She's just… Another word. The old man's cane struck the floor heavily, his voice turning to ice. And I will call your uncle today and have him freeze the defense materials approval for all 3 of your projects. It was as if Grayson's mouth had been sealed. All 3 of his projects were tied to the approval of defense alloy technologies, and the right of approval was under Julian Croft's purview. Eleanor, the old man nodded to her. Go home. In 3 days, I will send a car for you. Eleanor nodded, without another word. She turned and walked toward the exit. As she passed Grayson, she didn't slow down, didn't turn her head. Only as she passed, she said so quietly that only the 2 of them could hear. Thank you, Grayson Croft, for not marrying me. Grayson's body froze in place. Eleanor was already out of the hall. Her back was straight, her stride confident. Her heels clicked clearly and evenly on the stone tiles. No one knew that the nails digging into the strap of her purse had left 4 bloody crescents on her palm. The estate gates closed behind her. Eleanor got into a waiting taxi, gave an address, leaned back in her seat, and closed her eyes. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, silently turned the wheel, and merged into the flow of traffic. Eleanor took her hand out of her purse and unclasped it. 4 crescents reddened her palm, one already seeping blood. Her phone vibrated. A message from her assistant, Kate. Eleanor, are you okay? How did it go at the Crofts? Eleanor didn't reply. She watched the skyscrapers and cars whiz by, and one phrase echoed in her head. He knows. What does he know? Julian Croft. What does he know about her? Who she is? That she was engaged to a Croft? Or something else? The taxi stopped in front of her apartment building. Eleanor paid, went up, opened and closed her door. Then she slid down the door to the floor. Her high-heeled shoes were still on. Her dress was wrinkled. She hugged her knees and buried her face in them. She didn't cry. Just sat there, motionless, as if all her strength had been drained. On the coffee table in the living room was an old framed photograph. Her and her father. Her father in a hard hat, standing in front of the silver body of a test chamber, smiling so wide his eyes were mere slits. That chamber later collapsed. Her father never came back. And it belonged to Croft Metals, a subsidiary of the Croft Corporation. 500,000. Grayson believed that her father's life and 5 years of engagement were worth $500,000. Eleanor lifted her face from her knees, looking at the photograph. Something in her gaze slowly hardened. The phone vibrated again. This time an unknown number. She hesitated for a second and answered. Eleanor Vance? The voice on the other end was young, clear, with the conciseness of a technician. This is Hayes, assistant to lead specialist Croft. Mr. Julian Croft asked me to inform you that he will be on time for the meeting in 3 days. Eleanor held the phone in silence. Furthermore, Mr. Julian Croft asked me to convey his words to you verbatim. A second's pause. Mr. Julian Croft said, if Miss Vance has any concerns, she should address them to me personally in 3 days. Until then, she has nothing to fear. The call ended. Eleanor stared at the phone screen for a long time, where the words, call ended, glowed. Nothing to fear. She suddenly felt that the weight of those words was far greater than the weight of the agreement Grayson had thrown on the table. It was already dark outside. The city lights were coming on one by one. Streams of cars, thousands of lights in windows. None of them shone for her. But in 3 days, maybe things would be different. Eleanor stood up, kicked off her shoes, walked barefoot to the table, picked up the photograph, and looked at it for a long time. Then she turned it face down and put it back. Walking to the window, she picked up her phone and replied to Kate, I'm fine. Back to work as usual tomorrow. After sending the message, she typed another line. Hesitated, then deleted it. The line read, find me information on a person, Julian Croft. No need to search. In 3 days, she would see for herself. The next morning, at the old Croft estate, Grayson stood at the door of his grandfather's study, his face pale. Grandfather, what is all this? This Eleanor? What's the deal with her? The old man sat at his desk, reading glasses on his nose, flipping through a scientific journal. He didn't even look up. She's just an ordinary technician. No connections, no resources, no family. And uncle, who is he? A lead specialist. By what right? You broke off the engagement with her. The old man turned a page. Who she marries now is none of your concern. Grayson was taken aback. I'm worried about Uncle. He changed his tactic. Uncle's status is important. His wife should be his equal. An equal? The old man finally looked up, took off his glasses, and looked at his grandson. Do you know whose daughter your uncle was set up with last month? An academic's daughter. Do you think what you call an equal means anything in your uncle's eyes? Grayson opened and closed his mouth. Grayson, the old man stood up, leaning on his cane, and slowly walked over to him. I'll ask you one question. Grayson instinctively took a half step back. In 5 years of being engaged to Eleanor, did she ever once seek you out? Spend a penny of your money? Ever once flaunt her status as Grayson Croft's fiancé? Grayson was silent. No, the old man answered for him. She asked for nothing. She earned her position in this industry through her own hard work. And you? All you can say is unworthy, a hanger-on. Do you have the right to say that? The cane struck the floor heavily. You will come to understand what you lost today. The old man walked past him, opened the study door, and left. Grayson stood there, his fists clenched white. He didn't believe that some Eleanor could achieve anything. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Check what projects Eleanor Vance is currently working on. And also, he hesitated, gritting his teeth. Check my uncle's schedule. When did he get back to New York? The person on the other end confirmed and hung up. Grayson shoved his phone in his pocket and strode out of the study. He didn't know that at the very moment he was making his call, in the living room below, the old man was already dialing another number. Julian, the old man's voice was much softer than before, with even a hint of caution. I've almost settled things here. In 3 days, can you make some time and come over? There was a moment of silence on the other end, then a low, steady voice, like the wind sweeping over the vast plains, replied, No need for 3 days. I'm already on my way. The next evening, as Eleanor was returning home from the lab, she saw that her entire street was blocked off. 2 black SUVs, shiny and polished, were parked on the side of the road. Men in dark suits stood by the vehicles, at attention. Neighbors were giving them a wide berth. Several old women, leaning out of their windows, were excitedly discussing something. Eleanor stopped. A young man stepped away from the first SUV and walked toward her. It was the same voice from the phone, Hayes. Hayes approached Eleanor and gave a slight nod. Miss Vance, Mr. Julian Croft ordered this to be delivered to you. Please accept it. He stepped aside and handed her an elegant black leather briefcase. The briefcase was unlatched. Eleanor took just one glance inside. A Centurion black card, keys to a penthouse in Midtown, and legal documents for a multi-million-dollar trust fund set up in her name. Neighbors on the street had already started filming with their phones. Eleanor frowned. Mr. Hayes, she began. Miss Vance, please. Please take all of this back. Hayes froze for a moment. Miss Vance, this is Mr. Julian Croft's order. I know it's Mr. Julian Croft's order. Eleanor interrupted him in a steady voice. But he and I haven't even met yet. There's been no talk of a wedding. Sending all this now is inappropriate. A look of difficulty crossed Hayes's face. He clearly had not expected this response. Miss Vance, Mr. Julian Croft said these aren't just gifts, but… Mr. Hayes, Eleanor looked at him. I'll ask you one question. Hayes instinctively straightened up. If I accept this briefcase now, tomorrow the whole street will know. The day after, all of New York will be gossiping that Eleanor, cast off by the young Croft, immediately latched onto his uncle, the lead specialist. Such a flashy display of wealth right outside my apartment. She paused. Do you think, at a moment like this, by sending me this fortune, Mr. Julian Croft is honoring me or putting me in the line of fire? Hayes's face changed. He opened his mouth to say something, but thought better of it. Please, convey this to Mr. Julian Croft, Eleanor continued. I will be on time for the meeting the day after tomorrow, and all this, after the meeting, when everything is decided, it won't be too late then. She paused and smiled slightly. Or do you believe that Mr. Julian Croft is the type of man who gives gifts only to take them back? It was checkmate. If Hayes insisted on leaving the gifts, it would mean he considered Julian Croft impulsive. If he took them away, it would be a violation of orders. Hayes was silent for 5 seconds. Very well, he finally said. There was something new in his voice, not quite respect, not quite approval. I will relay Miss Vance's words to Mr. Julian Croft verbatim. He took a step back, nodded, and gave the order. The men quickly closed the briefcase. The SUVs started up and slowly left the street. The neighbors' discussions grew even louder. Eleanor, paying no mind, turned and walked toward her building. As soon as she closed the door, her phone rang. It was Kate. Eleanor, do you know there were black SUVs outside your building? My whole social media feed is blowing up. I know, they're already gone. Gone? What do you mean? Whose were they? I'll tell you the day after tomorrow. Eleanor hung up and leaned back on the sofa. Her palms were damp. Every word she had just spoken was an improvisation, but the logic was sound. She knew all too well the position a jilted woman held in the eyes of society. Whatever she did would be interpreted as an attempt to latch onto someone. Black SUVs and a briefcase of wealth at her doorstep, she could already imagine tomorrow's headlines. That's why she couldn't accept it. At least, not now. It wasn't pride, not coyness. It was pragmatism. She didn't need mercy. She needed equality. Her phone lit up. A text from an unknown number. Hayes relayed your message. I was inconsiderate. The day after tomorrow, the choice of venue is yours. JC. Eleanor stared at the screen for 3 seconds. The lead specialist of the National Center, the man who held the approval for all the country's defense materials, was telling her, I was inconsiderate. Over a flashy display of wealth. She held the phone, and the corners of her lips involuntarily crept up. She replied with 5 words. As Lawrence Croft decides. After sending it, she put the phone down and walked to the window. The street below was quiet again. The owner of the bakery across the street was cleaning his counter as if nothing had happened. But Eleanor knew, from the day after tomorrow, much would change. She turned and looked at the photograph on the table. Her father in a hard hat, smiling so wide, his eyes were mere slits. Dad, she whispered, just a little longer. Outside, it was completely dark. The city lights, like a reflection of a starry river on the ground. In the distance, a car honked. Her phone lit up again. The same number. Very well, but there is one thing I want to warn you about. I will be on time the day after tomorrow, but I may not be dressed appropriately. Just came from the lab. Eleanor looked at the message, and the smile on her face grew wider. She didn't reply. She placed the phone face down on the table and walked barefoot to the bathroom. Hot water streamed down her body. She closed her eyes. Only one phrase remained in her head. He knows. In 3 days, she would find out exactly what that meant. 3 days later, at 2 in the afternoon, Lawrence Croft's car brought Eleanor to a private estate outside New York. Mr. Julian is there, the chauffeur pointed to a pavilion by the water in the depths of the garden. Miss Vance, please go ahead. Mr. Lawrence instructed that no one should accompany you. Eleanor got out of the car and walked along the stone path to the pavilion. The garden was huge, with a bamboo grove. The autumn wind rustled the leaves. The pavilion stood in the center of an artificial lake, its walls made of solid, transparent glass. Through the glass, Eleanor saw a man sitting inside. He was wearing a dark gray, thin sweater, the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing tanned wrists and a thin scar. His profile was strong, with a high forehead, a straight nose, and a determined chin, as if carved from stone. He was reading some document, a cup of tea next to him. He sat in a relaxed manner, but his back was perfectly straight, a habit of not slouching even at rest. He was younger and more handsome than she had imagined. Eleanor took a deep breath and opened the pavilion door. Mr. Croft, she said, stopping at the entrance. Julian Croft looked up. The moment he saw her, his hand, which was turning a page, froze. They looked at each other from a distance of 5 or 6 meters. Eleanor was wearing a white shirt dress, her hair simply gathered at the back. No makeup, no jewelry. Compared to the mahogany furniture and expensive tea set in the pavilion, she looked too simple, like a blank sheet of paper. But it was this simplicity that made her stand out in this space full of expensive things. Julian put the document aside and stood up. He was tall, nearly 6'3". When he stood, the space in the pavilion seemed to shift. Please, sit, he gestured to the chair opposite him. Not a single extra word, no greetings. Eleanor walked over and sat down opposite him. Julian sat down again. He didn't rush to speak. He looked at her, his gaze calm, assessing, but without aggression. Eleanor also remained silent. 5 seconds of silence. You returned yesterday's things, Julian spoke. His voice was lower than on the phone, with a hint of rasp. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. I did, Eleanor replied. Why? The timing was inappropriate. Julian looked at her, and the corners of his lips twitched imperceptibly. It wasn't a smile, but rather a kind of acknowledgement. Hayes relayed your words. He said you thought a flashy display of wealth at your doorstep was an attempt to put you in the line of fire. And you, Mr. Croft, do you not think so? Julian didn't answer right away. He picked up his cup, took a sip, and put it back down. Initially I didn't, he said. But after your words, yes, I do. Eleanor was slightly surprised. I was inconsiderate, Julian said, looking at her with a steady gaze. The words were spoken directly, without any preamble. I shouldn't have done it that way. Eleanor didn't expect an apology. The lead specialist of the National Center, the man who held the approval for all the country's defense materials, apologizing for a flashy display of wealth. No need to worry, Mr. Croft. I just wanted to clarify one thing. Speak. This engagement is Mr. Lawrence Croft's initiative. You agreed. Perhaps out of respect for him, perhaps for other reasons. But I don't want outsiders to think, she paused, choosing her words, that after being dumped by Grayson, I latched onto a higher branch. What does that have to do with me? Eleanor looked at him. If you marry me, those words will concern you. They will become knives that will wound your reputation. Lead Specialist Croft married the woman his nephew cast aside. You may not care, but others will. Julian was silent. Not because he was convinced, but because he was waiting for her to finish. Therefore, I want to ask you one question, Mr. Croft. Ask. Are you sure you won't regret this? Julian looked at her. Eleanor, he said her name for the first time. Her breath caught for a moment. I have a habit. Before I make a decision, I think for a long time. But once the decision is made, he picked up his cup, took a sip, and put it down. I never regret it. 3 words, spoken in an even tone, but they sounded like nails being driven into the air. I'm only saying this once, he added. Eleanor looked at him and suddenly realized that the corners of her lips were creeping up. She couldn't stop it. All right, she said. What's all right? I believe you and this engagement. Wait. Eleanor made a stopping gesture with her hand. Julian froze slightly. Probably not many people dared to interrupt him. Mr. Croft, Eleanor said, looking at him. I believe you won't regret it. But I have one more condition. Speak. Until the official marriage, I will not appear at any public events as your fiancé. I will not live in your house, spend your money, or use your connections. I will rely only on myself. Julian's eyebrows twitched imperceptibly. And on the day that all of New York stops thinking that I'm clinging to you to get ahead, on that day, I will accept your gifts. She finished. Silence fell in the pavilion again. Julian looked at her, something swirling in his dark eyes. It was unclear what, but it was very weighty. And then he suddenly smiled. Not just the corners of his lips twitching, but a real smile. The corners of his lips rose, his eyes softened, and even his gaze brightened for a moment. Deal, he said. So be it. Eleanor didn't expect him to agree so easily. Your condition is reasonable. Julian stood up and walked to the window, his back to her, looking at the lake. And, he turned to her, the smile still on his face, I wasn't planning on buying you with gifts anyway. Eleanor's ears burned. But I have a condition too. She turned. What is it? If problems arise, any problems, tell me immediately. His gaze suddenly sharpened. Don't try to handle it yourself. Eleanor looked at him. She wanted to say no need, but the word stuck in her throat, because he said it not as a request, but as an order. All right, she nodded in the end. Julian's brows smoothed out. He walked to the table, pulled a business card from under a folder, and handed it to her. My personal number, the one Hayes has, is for work. Sometimes I turn it off. This number is on 24 hours a day. Eleanor took the card. Black cardstock, with only a phone number on it. No name, no title. Mr. Croft. She stood up. Yes? Thank you. For what? Eleanor didn't answer that question. She put the card in her pocket and, with a slight bow, said, I should be going. Wait. His voice stopped her. She turned around. Sit down. There's something I shouldn't have mentioned before the meeting. Now I can. His tone changed. It was no longer a relaxed conversation, but something official. But beneath that official tone, there was something else. Eleanor sat down again. Julian, too. He placed his hands on the table, his fingers tapping lightly on the surface as if he were choosing his words. Lawrence Croft told you the phrase, he knows. Eleanor's back tensed slightly. You want to know what I know about you? It wasn't a question, but a statement. Yes, Eleanor said. Julian looked at her. 3 years ago, at the Northwest facility, a project testing alloys in extremely cold conditions. Eleanor's fingers tightened slightly. The decay algorithm model submitted by the Croft Metals Corporation contained a gross error. The stress parameters in extremely cold conditions were underestimated by 4 orders of magnitude. If they had started mass production based on this algorithm, the first batch of alloy components at -50 degrees would have lasted no more than 3 months before failing. His voice was even, as if he were reading a technical report. The protective armor of my test squadron was made from this alloy. Eleanor's breathing became shallow. 5 days before the acceptance tests, someone anonymously sent a corrected algorithm model to the base. Julian's gaze was fixed on her. The model used a unique recursive decay formula. I searched for 3 months. Across the entire country, there are no more than 3 people who use such a recursive formula structure. He paused. 2 of them are retired academics. And the third, Eleanor's fingers dug into the armrest of the chair. A 24-year-old head of a technical department, working in a basement lab at Croft Metals. Her name Eleanor Vance. A long silence filled the pavilion. The wind rustled the bamboo leaves outside the window. How do you know it was me? Eleanor's voice grew quieter. The formula structure narrowed the circle to 3 people, but the corrected model had one unique feature: the way the ultimate failure limit in extreme cold was marked. You used that method in your article published in the Advanced Materials Journal. He spoke his words clearly. Across the entire country, only one person uses that marking method. You. Eleanor closed her eyes for a moment. So that's what Lawrence Croft meant when he said you knew, she whispered. Not just that. Eleanor opened her eyes. Something else had appeared in Julian's gaze. No longer an assessment. That algorithm saved my entire squadron, 17 men, he said. If the first batch had been produced with the flawed model, during a night patrol at -50 degrees, the armor would have disintegrated on the move. 17 men. No one would have survived. He didn't continue, but the meaning was clear. The anonymously sent algorithm didn't just correct a technical error. It saved lives. Many lives. I've been looking for you for 3 years, Julian said. When he spoke those words, his tone didn't change. Still as even, as restrained. But Eleanor heard the weight hidden behind that phrase. 3 years. The lead specialist of the National Center had been searching for 3 years for the person who had anonymously sent the algorithm. So, you agreed to this engagement, Eleanor began. Not because of Lawrence Croft. Not because you were dumped and I pitied you, Julian interrupted her. Not out of a sense of duty. Then why? Julian looked at her. Because I searched for 3 years and finally found out who you are. A pause. A person capable of writing such an algorithm must have had access to the real decay data that Croft Metals deliberately hid. A person with access to the real data, who decided to send the correction anonymously, leaving no traces, demanding no reward. He fell silent. Eleanor, he said, I wanted to see this person. And when I did, I found out that my worthless nephew had also dumped her. The corners of his lips twitched. Someone like that, you have to claim for yourself. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She looked at the man opposite her. When he said all this, there were no extra emotions on his face. He didn't even change his posture. One hand on the armrest, the other next to his cup. His back was straight, his gaze calm. But it was this calmness that made every word weighty. He didn't need to back up his judgments with emotions. He simply stated his conclusion. Eleanor took a deep breath. Mr. Croft. Yes. Do you know what all of New York is saying about me? I'm not interested. But I am. Eleanor looked at him. They're saying I'm a laughingstock who is cast aside. They're saying I'm a frog who wants to be a princess. They're saying that as soon as Grayson dumped me, I immediately hooked his uncle, the lead specialist. What does that have to do with me? If you marry me, those words will concern you. They will become knives that will wound your reputation. Lead specialist Croft married the woman his nephew cast aside. You may not care, but others will. Therefore, I want to ask you one question, Mr. Croft. Ask. Are you sure? You already asked. Eleanor was momentarily at a loss. Julian looked at her. You asked that question 5 minutes ago. My answer hasn't changed. The corners of Eleanor's lips twitched. She suddenly realized that talking to this man was a strange feeling. He always answered the main question, not allowing for evasion. But every time he cornered her, she didn't feel uncomfortable. She felt a sense of security, as if she had been caught with precision. All right, she said. Then I won't ask again. Anything else? Eleanor looked at him, hesitating for a second. Yes, speak. 3 years ago, when I sent that algorithm, I knew that Croft Metals was a Croft company. Julian's gaze changed slightly. I know, he said. Silence again. Eleanor looked at him. He looked at her. Do you know why I sent it? I have my suspicions, Julian said, but I want to hear it from you. Eleanor placed her hands on her knees and squeezed them. Because my father died on a Croft project, her voice was even. The alloy data in that project was also falsified, just like the one you received 3 years ago. Lowering key parameters, concealing material defects, cutting costs. My father discovered the problem, presented the correct data, and then that data was swapped. The test chamber was built with the wrong formula. 3 months later, it collapsed. Her voice didn't waver. So, 3 years ago, when I saw the same signature, the same algorithm in your project in the Croft Metals internal system, I didn't hesitate. Julian was silent. I didn't know you would get that algorithm. I only knew that the director of a defense project would have no common interests with the Crofts and would take the correction seriously. She looked at him. I did the right thing. You did the right thing, Julian said. Silence again. But this time it was different. Not a confrontation, not a test. More like two people remeasuring the distance between them. Eleanor. Yes? I am investigating your father's case. Eleanor's fingers tightened. The internal technical archives of Croft Metals are encrypted. We are now at the 3rd level. In the test chamber project your father was involved in, there were 2 sets of alloy data. One was the original, signed by your father. The other was the substituted version. The difference is in the ultimate strength. In the original, the ultimate failure limit in extreme cold was -42 degrees. In the altered version, it was -65. The actual operating temperature of the chamber was -50. Eleanor's nails dug into her palm. In the original data, the failure limit was -42 degrees. The actual operating temperature was -50. This meant that according to her father's correct data, this alloy should never have been used in those conditions. But someone changed the limit to -65 to make the data look safe. And then the chamber collapsed, and her father died. Who did it? Her voice was quiet. We're still investigating. Only the top management of Croft Metals has access to the encrypted layer. The list is short, no more than 5 people. Julian looked at her. It will take time, but we will find out. Eleanor closed her eyes. She could feel her whole body trembling slightly, not from cold, For the first time in 3 years, a man stood before her and said, "I am investigating your father's case." And this man was capable of getting to the truth. "Eleanor," she opened her eyes. Julian was sitting 2 meters away from her. He didn't come closer, didn't extend a hand, didn't make any extra movements. He just looked at her. "You don't have to handle this alone." 5 words. Eleanor looked at him. There was a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. In the end, she just nodded, barely noticeable. Julian understood. "That's all for today," he stood up. "I'll arrange a car back for you." Eleanor also stood up. "Mr. Croft." "Yes?" "Thank you for telling me about that algorithm." Julian looked at her. "Thank you for sending it." They looked at each other for 3 seconds. Eleanor was the first to look away. With a slight nod, she said, "I'll be going." She walked to the door. When she was at the exit, Julian's voice came from behind. "Eleanor." She stopped, without turning. 3 years ago, when you sent that algorithm, did you know the project was overseen by the Crofts?" Eleanor's back tensed. "I did," she said. There was no sound from behind. She opened the door and left. In the car back, Eleanor sat, leaning back in her seat, and looked at the black business card in her hand. She knew, 3 years ago, when she sent that algorithm, of course she knew the project was overseen by the Crofts. It was because she knew that she sent it anonymously. Because her father had died on a Croft project. Because she had studied all the technical data of that project and discovered that the alloy data had been falsified. Just like in the case of her father's test chamber. Shoddy work, falsified data, concealment of defects. And if something happened, blame it on a rank-and-file technician. When her father died, the Crofts gave $10,000 for the funeral. $10,000 for the life of a top-tier engineer. $10,000. So 3 years ago, when she saw that flawed algorithm, she didn't hesitate. She wrote the corrected model, anonymously, and sent it to the military inspector of the project. She didn't know that the inspector was Julian. She only knew that the military would have no common interests with the Crofts and would take the model seriously. She did the right thing. But she didn't expect the man who received the algorithm to search for her for 3 years, and she certainly didn't expect him to appear in her life in this way. Eleanor turned the business card in her hands and closed her eyes. He knows who she is. Knows she sent that algorithm. Knows her abilities. But he doesn't know why she sent it. Doesn't know how her father died. Doesn't know that the Crofts owe her much more than just an apology for breaking an engagement. And doesn't know that she agreed to this engagement not only because she was moved by his phrase about the 3-year search. There was another reason, one she would tell no one. She had to find out who exactly had falsified the data on that project 3 years ago. Was her father's death an accident or a premeditated murder? And the answer was within the Croft family. The phone vibrated. A text. From the number on the business card. "Text me when you get home." 4 words. Eleanor looked at the screen, and the corners of her lips twitched. She replied with 1 word. "Okay." At 11 p.m., Eleanor's phone lit up. Julian's number. "Not a text, a call," she answered. "Asleep?" "No." "What are your plans for tomorrow?" "To the lab. I need to process material test data in the afternoon." "What's for lunch?" Eleanor took the phone from her ear, looked at the screen, made sure it was Julian, lead specialist at the National Center, Julian Croft, asking her what she was having for lunch. "Something." "Not something." "What do you suggest?" "On the street where your company is, around the corner, there's a diner. Best meatloaf in the city, real gravy." Eleanor's fingers froze. "How do you know what's near my company?" "I was there." "When?" "The day before yesterday. I was waiting for Hayes." Eleanor was silent for 3 seconds. The day before yesterday. The day she returned the gifts. After Hayes left her place to report back. Julian was near her work. "And how long were you waiting near my work the day before yesterday?" The other end didn't answer right away. Then Julian said 2 words. "Not long." Eleanor knew he was lying, but she didn't press it. "Mr. Croft." "Yes. Thank you for telling me all this today." "You're welcome. And also..." "Yes? Next time, before you call, maybe text first." "What if I'm asleep?" The other end went silent for a second. "You said you weren't asleep." "But what if I am next time?" "Then I won't call." A pause. "But if you have insomnia, call me anytime. This number is on 24 hours. Eleanor held the phone, feeling her ears start to burn. "Got it. Good night." "Good night, Mr. Croft." The call ended. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, pulling the blanket up to her nose. The phone screen hadn't even dimmed when it lit up again. A new message. From now on, you don't have to call me Mr. Croft, just my name. Eleanor looked at the message, and a smile finally appeared on her face. She typed 2 words, hesitated for a second, and sent. Okay, Julian. The reply came instantly. Yes, sleep. Eleanor placed the phone on the pillow next to her, turned to the other side, and closed her eyes. 3 years. For the first time in 3 years, she felt that being alone was, perhaps, not so natural after all. A week later, Eleanor's workshop. Kate came into the room, her face changed. Eleanor, there are some people downstairs. Eleanor, bent over a lab table, was checking data. Without looking up, she asked, What people? Grayson Croft and his lawyers. They say they want to discuss the rights to a project with you. I said you were busy. They won't leave. The pen in Eleanor's hand froze. She put it down and stood up. How many of them? Grayson and 2 lawyers. But there are 3 more cars outside. Probably someone in them too. Kate bit her lip. Eleanor, maybe we should call the police? No need. Let them come up. Let them come up? Let them come up. Eleanor repeated, opened a desk drawer, took out a folder, and placed it on the table. 2 minutes later, Grayson opened the workshop door. He was in a custom-made dark blue suit with a flawlessly tied tie. Behind him followed 2 men in their 40s, in business suits, with briefcases in hand. Lawyers, obviously. Grayson looked around the workshop. 600 square feet, a large lab table, 2 high-precision measuring devices, walls covered with graphs and material analysis reports. In the corner, several boxes with alloy samples. He curled his lip in a smirk that said, And this is it? Eleanor, he began. His voice was more restrained than that day at the estate, but the arrogance was still there. I'm not here today on personal business. It's work. Eleanor stood behind the lab table and didn't offer him a seat. Speak. Grayson took a document from his lawyer and, placing it on the table, pushed it towards her. The Deep Space Alloy Development Project. The one you led at Croft Metals. All intellectual property rights for this project belong to Croft Metals. You signed an employment contract. There's a clause about commercial secrecy and rights to developments. Eleanor didn't touch the document. Yes. The core algorithm of this project, Grayson leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets, was developed under the supervision of Marina Volkova. You were just an assistant. But we recently received information that you, on the side, under your own name, won a tender for testing defense materials. And you used an algorithm structure very similar to the one in this project. He smirked. Eleanor, I came today to give you a chance to save face. The lawyer next to him immediately opened his briefcase, took out a prepared statement, and placed it on the table with a pen. Sign this statement relinquishing rights to the technology. Confirm that all algorithm models for the Deep Space Project, without exception, belong to us. You personally have no right to use, transfer, or publish them. Grayson's tone was flippant. Sign it, and that's it, and I'll have Croft Metals pay you a penalty. $1 million enough? Eleanor looked down at the relinquishment statement, then at the document Grayson had brought. Grayson. Yes? You say the core algorithm for the Deep Space Project was developed under the supervision of Marina Volkova? Yes, so what? And you don't know that 3 days ago this project got a new lead director? Grayson's face froze for a moment. What? The National Center sent out an internal notice last Friday. Eleanor's tone was as even as if she were talking about the weather. Croft Metals failed the re-evaluation of technical qualifications and was removed from the list of participants in the Deep Space Project. The new lead director is the Defense Materials Division of the National Center. Grayson's right eye twitched. His 2 lawyers exchanged glances. One of them quickly pulled out his phone and started searching for something. Impossible! Grayson's voice turned harsh. I personally negotiated with the center on this project. The contracts are signed. The contracts are signed, but that doesn't mean they can't be terminated. Eleanor pulled a sheet of paper from the folder on the table and pushed it towards Grayson. This is the official notification from the National Center. It came out yesterday. You can call and check. Grayson snatched the sheet, his eyes quickly scanning the text. The more he read, the paler he became. The paper bore the red seal of the National Center. The content was simple. Due to the contractor's failure to meet the requirements of the re-evaluation of technical qualifications, the lead director for the Deep Space Alloy Project was being changed to the Defense Materials Division of the National Center. This is impossible, Grayson raised his voice. Who has the right to do this? He sharply raised his head and locked eyes with Eleanor. It was Julian, wasn't it? He did this? Did you ask him to take my project away from me? Eleanor didn't answer the question. Grayson, she said, you came to my workshop with lawyers to force me to sign away my rights to the technology. Your argument is that you're a participant in the project, and the rights belong to you. She paused. But you don't even know that you've already been kicked out. Your information is a bit outdated. Grayson's hand crumpled the paper. Eleanor, what about me? You think by latching onto Julian, you can crush me? Grayson's face turned crimson, his voice breaking. You think he'll go against his own nephew for you? Dream on. Mr. Croft, Kate couldn't take it anymore and stepped forward. I'll ask you to speak more politely. Grayson pushed Kate. Not just a push, but a forceful shove. Kate flew back 2 steps and hit her lower back against the metal corner of the lab table, doubling over in pain. Get lost. Some assistant dares to talk back. Grayson. Eleanor's voice didn't get louder, but everyone in the workshop froze. She came out from behind the table, knelt down, and looked at Kate's back. There were tears in Kate's eyes. She had bitten her lip until it bled. Eleanor stood up and looked at Grayson. In my workshop, you raised a hand to my person. She asked for it. I'll ask you 3 questions. Eleanor interrupted him, her voice as clear as if she were reading contract clauses. You don't have to answer me. Answer yourself. Grayson instinctively fell silent. First, who among us was the first to break the engagement? Me. Second, what did you say then? With your background, an engagement to the Croft family is an unprecedented stroke of luck. Unworthy. $500,000 for walking away. Am I right? Grayson's jaw clenched. Third, Eleanor stepped forward, less than a meter between them. You broke my engagement. You humiliated me. Now that I have another engagement, you barge into my workshop, force me to sign away my rights, and you hit my assistant. Her gaze was as straight as a ruler. Who the hell do you think you are? Silence fell in the room for 2 seconds. The 2 lawyers had already quietly closed their briefcases. They were paid for their work, not to get involved in disputes with the National Center. Grayson's chest heaved, blood rushing to his face. He opened his mouth, but before he could say anything, quick, even footsteps echoed from the hallway. Many footsteps, boots on the concrete stairs, rhythmic, heavy, fast. The workshop door flew open from the outside. Hayes stood on the threshold, followed by 4 men in dark blue uniforms. Miss Vance? Hayes's gaze swept the room and landed on Grayson. We received a signal about an unusual situation. Eleanor was slightly surprised. She hadn't called the police. She instinctively looked at Kate, who shook her head no. Mr. Julian Croft gave the order 10 minutes ago, Hayes said and stepped aside. The footsteps of another person came from the stairs. Not fast, but heavy. Julian appeared from around the bend in the stairs, not in an official suit, a dark gray thin sweater, sleeves rolled up to his forearms, just like that day in the pavilion by the water. But when he entered this 600 square foot workshop, everyone held their breath. Not because of his status, but because of how he carried himself. Back straight, gaze calm. The atmosphere around him was such that the temperature in the hallway seemed to drop by 10 degrees. Grayson recoiled. It was an instinctive reaction. In front of Julian, he had behaved this way since childhood. Julian entered the workshop, his gaze first falling on Kate, who was still bent over, leaning on the table. Then he looked at Eleanor. Eleanor shook her head slightly, signaling that she was fine. Julian's gaze moved from her face to Grayson. Who did this? 3 words, spoken quietly, but everyone in the workshop heard them clearly. Grayson's throat tightened. Uncle, it's a misunderstanding. I didn't mean to. I asked, who did this? But. Grayson's mouth remained open, unable to say anything. Julian didn't ask him again. He turned to Hayes. Record. Project lead from Croft Metals Corporation, Grayson Croft, used violence in the workplace of a participant in a federally funded research project, resulting in injury to an employee. Hayes immediately took out a notepad and began to write. Grayson's face turned completely white. Uncle, this is a civil dispute. It has nothing to do with the National Center. The Deep Space Alloy Project, Julian interrupted him, was transferred to the jurisdiction of the Defense Materials Division of the National Center 3 days ago. You came here today to force a technical specialist to sign away her rights. This is not a civil dispute. This is interference with the normal operation of a federally funded research project. Grayson's knees buckled. He finally understood. The moment the project came under the jurisdiction of the National Center, everything he had done today changed its nature. I didn't know the director had changed. You didn't know? Julian looked at him. The notification from the National Center was sent out 3 days ago. As the project lead from the contractor, you didn't see it in 3 days? Grayson couldn't say anything. Or, Julian's tone didn't change. Did you see it but decided it wasn't important? That in the National Center's projects you, Grayson Croft, can do whatever you want? No, Uncle, I really didn't know. All the worse, Julian said. If you don't even track the status of your own projects, how can you manage them? He turned to Hayes. Notify Croft Metals. All projects involving Grayson Croft that are connected to the National Center are to be frozen at the technical approval stage, effective today. Reason: project lead has demonstrated violent behavior and interfered with a federally funded research project. A reevaluation of his qualifications is required. Yes, sir. Hayes closed his notepad. Uncle! Grayson's voice broke into a shriek, with notes of pleading. You can't do this. These projects. This is family business. Family. Julian looked at him. One word. Grayson didn't dare speak again, because the look said clearly. So what? Julian no longer looked at him. He took 2 items from his folder and placed them on the lab table. The first was a thick, hardcover notebook. In the bottom right corner was a red number and the stamp, Top Secret Number 03. The second was a neatly bound document. The cover read, Initial Derivation of the Core Algorithm for Deep Space Alloys. In the top right corner, handwritten, Total 234 pages. Julian's finger lightly pressed on the notebook. These are all the initial derivations of the core algorithm for the Deep Space Project, done by Eleanor Vance during her time at Croft Metals. His voice was even, every word clear. 234 pages. Each page has a timestamp and a lab journal number. The Technical Commission of the National Center has cross-referenced and confirmed. The algorithm model claimed by Croft Metals is 100% based on this manuscript. He looked up at Grayson. You just said that the core algorithm of this project was developed under the supervision of Marina Volkova? Grayson's lips moved, but no sound came out. 234 pages of initial manuscripts. Each page with notes, timestamps, experiment numbers. All pointing to Eleanor. Julian's finger lifted from the notebook. Marina Volkova's name does not appear once in these 234 pages. A dead silence fell in the workshop. Grayson's hands hung at his sides, knuckles white. Thus, Julian's voice was still even. The project qualification claimed by Croft Metals with Marina Volkova as the key developer was fraudulent from the start. He looked at Hayes. Record a second point. Croft Metals is suspected of providing false information about developers to obtain qualification for a federally funded research project. Propose that the Technical Oversight Department of the National Center open a case for investigation. Yes, sir. Uncle, you raised a hand to a person. Julian's voice finally had some temperature, but it was sub-zero. To my person. And you think I would pretend not to notice? My person. Eleanor, standing at the lab table, heard those 2 words and felt her heart skip a beat. Grayson heard it too. His gaze darted between Julian and Eleanor. Your person? His voice trembled. Uncle, she's just... Escort him out for a statement. Julian didn't let him finish. The security officers stepped forward. Grayson tried to step back but was cornered between the doorframe and the officers. Uncle! Grayson's shouts echoed from the hallway, growing fainter and fainter until they died out on the stairs. The 2 lawyers stood in place, pale, not daring to breathe. Julian looked at them. You can go. Tell the Crofts that this should not happen again. The lawyers, nodding like bobbleheads, grabbed their briefcases and almost ran out of the workshop. The workshop fell silent. Kate, leaning on the table, finally started to cry. Not from pain, but from the fear she had experienced. Kate, Eleanor went over and put her arm around her shoulders. Go to the hospital, get an X-ray. Eleanor, I'm fine. Get one. Eleanor's tone left no room for argument. She turned to Hayes. Mr. Hayes, would you be so kind as to drive her? Yes, ma'am. Hayes looked at Julian, received a barely perceptible nod, and approaching, helped Kate out. The door closed. Only Eleanor and Julian were left in the workshop. Eleanor, leaning against the lab table, took a deep breath. Her fingers were trembling slightly, but she quickly hid it by placing her palms on the table and spreading her fingers. How did you get here? She asked. Julian didn't answer right away. He walked over to her and, looking down, glanced at her hands. Hayes has a contact in the building across from your workshop, he said. He saw Grayson go in and informed me immediately. Eleanor frowned. You have me under surveillance? Protection, Julian corrected. not surveillance. I didn't consent. You did, he looked at her. Last time, you agreed to my condition. If problems arise, tell me immediately. You didn't tell me, so I came myself. Eleanor wanted to argue, but realized she had indeed made that promise. He was here for less than 10 minutes. I hadn't had a chance to. 10 minutes was enough for him to raise a hand to someone. Eleanor fell silent. Julian looked at her for 2 seconds. Then he turned and walked to the door. Halfway there, he stopped, took off his dark gray sweater, revealing a white shirt underneath. Folding the sweater, he came back and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. The sweater was large and warm, radiating his body heat. You're trembling, he said. Eleanor looked down at her hands. They were indeed still trembling slightly. She hadn't noticed. He had. I'm fine. Yes. Julian didn't argue. He just stood next to her for 5 seconds, making sure her fingers stopped trembling, and only then spoke. When Kate's X-ray results come in, let me know. If there's an injury, Grayson's report will be reclassified as a criminal case. Eleanor looked at him for 2 seconds. Are you serious? I never repeat myself. He turned and walked to the door. When he was at the exit, she called out, Julian. He stopped. It was the first time she had called him just by his name. Without Mr. Croft, without his title. Julian's gaze changed slightly. Thank you, Eleanor said. Julian looked at her. You're welcome, he said. The moment he raised a hand to you, it stopped being your business. It became mine. He opened the door and left. The footsteps in the hallway gradually faded. Eleanor stood alone in the empty workshop. His sweater was on her shoulders. The fabric had a faint smell of lab disinfectant and clean soap, mixed with the warmth of his body. She looked down at the 2, 3, 4-page manuscript on the table. He had placed it here, days ago, the day after their meeting in the pavilion by the water. He hadn't discussed it with her, hadn't warned her. He had simply, without her knowing, removed all possible stones from her path. Eleanor put the manuscript away in a cabinet and locked it. Her phone lit up. A message from Julian. When Kate's X-ray results come in, let me know. If there's an injury, the report will be reclassified. And then another one came immediately after. You can keep the sweater. It looks better on you than on me. Eleanor stared at the last message for 5 seconds. Then she put the phone down and, lowering her head, realized she couldn't remember when she had taken the sweater off her shoulders and was now pressing it to her chest, tightly clutching the sleeves. At 11 p.m. that same day, Kate sent a message. Eleanor, the results are in. Soft tissue contusion, no broken bones. The doctor said to rest for a week. Eleanor replied, Okay, don't come in tomorrow, rest at home. Putting the phone down, she picked it up again and wrote to Julian. Soft tissue contusion, no broken bones. The reply came instantly. Good. The report remains unchanged. Next time someone approaches your workshop, inform me first. Eleanor looked at the message, and the corners of her lips twitched. She typed 2 words and sent, Understood, Julian. After sending it, she placed the phone on the table. Outside, it was deep night. The lights in the building across the street were almost all out. But she knew, from today, all of New York would know one thing. Grayson Croft had touched the wrong person. And behind that person stood someone who didn't even bother to say Grayson Croft's name. That evening, Eleanor locked the workshop door. It was already 11. She sat alone at the lab table, the revisions to the Deep Space Project algorithm before her. The pen spun in her hands for half an hour, but not a single line was written. Her gaze kept returning to the developer field in the bottom left corner of the manuscript. Developer, Eleanor Vance. Years ago, when she first gained access to the internal data for this project, she was just a contract worker in a basement lab at Croft Metals. 1 desk, 1 old computer. Even the high-performance server for data modeling had to be waited for in line until other departments were done with it. Her father, when he was alive, often said, The most valuable thing a materials scientist has is not a diploma, but a lab journal. Every number, every formula in it, is your responsibility for every molecular chain of that material. Her father's lab journal was now in the archives of Croft Metals. The alloy formula for that collapsed test chamber had been derived by him from start to finish. But in the end, the patent was filed under Croft Metals. Her father was just a well-paid salaried engineer. No rights to his name, no royalties from the patent, no reward. He worked for 17 years, and then the chamber collapsed, and her father died. Croft Metals announced it was a worker's error. Paid $10,000 for the funeral. Case closed. No one bothered to find out if there were problems with the formula. No one bothered to find out if the decay parameters in extreme cold had been falsified, because if they had, the responsibility would have fallen on the Croft family. Eleanor put the pen down, leaned back in her chair, and stared at the fluorescent lamp on the ceiling. One of the lamps had a bad connection and was flickering. She closed her eyes. A memory suddenly surfaced. The morning her father left home for the last time. She was a second-year graduate student then, living in a dorm, and she was talking to him on the phone. He said, "Honey, I'm heading to the base for the final acceptance test today. I'll call you tonight." His voice was very cheerful, because this was his first state-level alloy project, and it was on the verge of completion. There was no call that evening. A technician from the base called instead. "Are you Engineer Vance's daughter? Your father? The test chamber? Come quickly." The technician on the phone was crying. She didn't cry. She remembered standing in the dorm hallway, clutching the phone, feeling all the warmth leave her body. What happened next was a blur. She only remembered lifting the white sheet in the hospital morgue. Her father's face was covered in gray dust. Alloy dust, like a thin mask. She slowly, with her hand, wiped away the dust. For a long time. After that day, she never went back to the university. She took an academic leave. With the money left from her father and his lab journals, she had survived until today. She opened her eyes. The lamp was still flickering. Eleanor lowered her head and looked at her hands, spread out on the table, just like in the afternoon. In the afternoon to hide the trembling. Now no one was watching, but her fingers were still trembling slightly. She clenched her hands into fists, then unclenched them. The dark marks from those bloody crescents were still under her nails. She gathered her things, stood up, and prepared to leave. She opened the workshop door. The light in the hallway was already off. She took out her phone to light her way. She reached the first-floor exit, pushed the iron door. It was raining outside. A light but autumnal rain. She had no umbrella. She stood under the awning, hesitating for a couple of seconds. Then she took off her jacket, put it over her head, and, stepping through puddles, ran towards her rented apartment. Halfway there, her shoes were soaked. Puddles splashed over her ankles, the cold making her shiver. Returning home, she turned on the light, closed the door. She stood alone in the hallway, rainwater dripping from her hair and clothes, forming a small puddle on the floor. She didn't move. On the coffee table was the same photograph. Her father in a hard hat, smiling so wide his eyes were mere slits. Eleanor looked at the photograph, and suddenly felt something rising from her chest. Not nausea, something more primal. The anger that had been building for years was now bursting out. She bit her lower lip. It didn't help? When the first sound escaped her throat, her knees gave way, she sank to the floor in the hallway, completely soaked. One hand clamped over her mouth, the other propped her up on the floor. Her shoulders shook. The sobs, muffled by her hand, sounded like a noise from a clogged horn. She didn't want to be heard. The neighbors upstairs had a child. The soundproofing was bad. But her tears wouldn't obey. One after another, they fell to the floor, mixing with the rainwater. It was impossible to tell which was which. "Dad," she sat on the floor. Only this word echoed through the apartment. For years, she hadn't shed a single tear in front of anyone. She didn't cry when she broke off the engagement with the Crofts. She didn't cry when the housekeeper openly mocked her. She didn't cry when she was alone in the lab until 4 a.m. fixing an algorithm until her fingers cramped. But today, for some reason, she couldn't hold back. Maybe because during the day Grayson's phrase about her late father replayed in her head. Maybe because seeing Kate pushed and hit the table, she remembered that her father, buried under the rubble of the alloy, had also not been helped up by anyone. Or maybe just because she was very tired. It's unknown how long she sat there. The puddle on the floor grew larger. Her pants were completely soaked. Her legs were so numb she could barely feel them. Leaning against the wall, she slowly stood up. Her legs buckled, she almost fell again. She needed to shower, change. There were things to do tomorrow. She headed for the bathroom. The doorbell rang. Eleanor stopped. She looked at the clock. 11:47 p.m. The doorbell rang again. Not insistent, but steady. She wiped her face with her hand, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. The light in the hallway had just come on. Julian stood outside the door. He was in a black windbreaker, with raindrops on his shoulders and hair. He had apparently been standing there for some time. In his left hand was a paper bag. His right hand was down. He wasn't ringing the bell. He was just standing there, looking at her. Eleanor's hand froze on the lock. She knew what she looked like now. Puffy eyes, red nose, wet hair, all her clothes as if they'd been in the water. She closed her eyes for a moment, took a deep breath, and opened the door. When Julian saw her, his gaze froze. They looked at each other across the threshold. The light in the hallway went out. Only the light from the apartment remained, illuminating half of Eleanor's face. Her eyes were noticeably red, the tip of her nose too, a bite mark on her lip. She didn't offer any explanations. Didn't say, "What are you doing here?" Didn't pretend nothing had happened. She just stood there. Julian also didn't ask what happened. He looked down at her wet clothes, then at the puddle on the floor. Then he handed her the paper bag. "Ginger and honey tea. Hayes said you got caught in the rain." Eleanor took the bag. Her fingers brushed his hand. His hand was warm. "Will you come in?" Her voice was a bit hoarse. Julian didn't answer right away. He looked at her for 2 seconds, as if assessing something. Then he stepped inside. The hallway was narrow. When they stood together, they were almost touching. Julian was too tall for this small space, and his presence felt particularly strong. He looked down at the puddle on the floor, then at the photograph on the coffee table. He said nothing. He took off his windbreaker, the black waterproof fabric, the lining still holding his body heat. He draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. The jacket was big. It completely covered her wet shoulders and arms. Eleanor's body tensed. "Go change into something dry," Julian said. His tone was as even and short as usual. No extra words. But as he adjusted the jacket on her, his fingers touched her shoulder, very lightly. Eleanor clutched the collar of the jacket and didn't move. "I'm fine," she said. Julian didn't argue. He walked into the living room, his gaze lingering for a second on the photograph. Then he turned and looked at Eleanor, who was still standing in the hallway. "Eleanor." "Yes?" "There's progress on your father's case." Eleanor's fingers tightened, crumpling the jacket collar. "Croft Metal's internal technical archives. Encryption level 4 has been broken." Julian's voice was even, but each word was clear. "The alloy data in your father's project, confirmed, was in 2 copies. One was the original, signed by your father. The other was the substituted version. The difference was in the extreme cold decay parameters. In the original, the ultimate failure limit was -42 degrees. In the altered version, -65. The actual operating temperature of the chamber was -50. Eleanor closed her eyes. "The IP address of the terminal from which the changes were made has been traced to the central server room on the 7th floor of Croft Metal's headquarters. Access to this terminal was restricted to only 4 people: Grayson Croft, Marina Volkova, Croft Metal's Vice President Viktor Ivanov." He paused. "And one other person." Eleanor opened her eyes. The eldest of the Croft sons, Grayson's father, William Croft. Eleanor's nails dug into her palm. William Croft, Lawrence Croft's eldest son. 10 years ago, he had stepped back from business, ceasing to be involved in the day-to-day management of the corporation. The official version was for health reasons. "Encryption level 5 has not yet been broken," Julian continued. "But the technical team suspects it doesn't contain Croft Metal's commercial data. The encryption protocol is military grade." Military grade. Someone had used Croft Metal's corporate servers to hide military secrets. The nature of this case had already gone beyond commercial crime. Julian looked at her. Eleanor stood in the hallway, wrapped in his windbreaker, her eyes closed. She could feel her whole body trembling slightly, not from cold. For the first time in years, a man stood before her and, layer by layer, revealed the truth about her father's death. And this man had the power to get to the bottom of it. "Eleanor?" She opened her eyes. Julian was standing 2 meters away from her. He didn't come closer, didn't extend a hand, didn't make any extra movements. He just looked at her. "You don't have to handle this alone." 5 words. Eleanor looked at him. There was a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something, but the words were stuck. Not gratitude, not appreciation. For the first time in years, a man stood before her who didn't need an explanation for why she was searching, why she was pursuing, why she couldn't let go. He simply said, "You don't have to handle this alone." In the end, she just nodded. Barely noticeable. Julian understood. "Go change. I'm leaving." He turned and walked to the door. When he was already in the hallway, Eleanor suddenly called out, "Julian." He stopped. "Why did you come today?" Julian didn't turn around. He stood at the door, his hand already on the handle. "Hayes said you got caught in the rain. Is that the only reason?" He was silent for 2 seconds. "No." His hand on the handle tightened, then relaxed. Because you didn't send me a single message all day. Eleanor froze. You usually send at least one a day, Julian said. His voice became very quiet, as if he were talking about something he had noticed long ago but never voiced. At least understood. Today nothing. The tip of Eleanor's nose tingled again. She held back. Next time, Julian opened the door. The light above his shoulder came on. When you want to cry, he stepped out. You don't have to do it alone. The door closed quietly behind him. Eleanor stood in the hallway, wrapped in his windbreaker. The fabric had a faint smell of soap and the warmth of his body. She lowered her head and buried her face in the collar. She didn't cry. But the hand clutching the collar did not relax for a long, long time. At 7 a.m. the next day, the phone rang. Not a text, a call. Good morning, Julian's voice from the phone. Eleanor, wrapped in a blanket, answered in a hoarse, sleepy voice. Morning. Caught a cold? No. Are you sure? 2 seconds of silence. When should I pick up the jacket? The windbreaker was now lying folded on the pillow next to her. She had slept hugging it. No rush, Julian said. What are your plans for today? To the lab, then to the workshop to finish the revisions. What's for lunch? Eleanor took the phone from her ear, looked at the screen, made sure it was Julian. Lead specialist at the National Center, Julian Croft. Again asking her what she was having for lunch. Haven't thought about it. Down the street from your workshop, 200 yards to the east, a new cafe opened. Pumpkin spice oatmeal. They cook it in a real cast iron pot. Eleanor suppressed a smile. Were you at my workshop again? I was passing by. Passing by? From the National Center to my workshop is at least a 20-minute detour. The other end was silent for a second. It was on the way. First you were passing by, now it was on the way. Which one is true? Both. Eleanor's face disappeared into the blanket, her ears burning. Julian. Yes. Did you wait for me long at my building last night? The other end didn't answer right away. Then Julian said 2 words. Not long. Eleanor knew he was lying. Hayes had said she got caught in the rain. That was on her way home from the workshop. Running that 7 or 8 minutes. She got home around 11:20 p.m. He knocked at 11:47 p.m., less than half an hour, but his shoulders and hair were wet. He had waited for her in the rain for at least 20 minutes. No need to explain, Eleanor said. She paused. Thank you for coming. The other end was silent for 3 seconds. Next time you're in the rain, take an umbrella. Okay. And if you don't have an umbrella, call me. I'll come. Eleanor pulled the blanket up to her nose. Got it. I ordered the oatmeal for you remotely. When you get there, just give them my name. You left your name at the cafe too? Workstation number. Just say Center 027. Eleanor finally couldn't hold back and laughed. All right, Center 027. Yes, are you free tonight? Yes, why? Encryption level 5 has been broken. I need you to look at something. Eleanor's laughter stopped. Okay, I'll see you tonight. Yes. When you finish the oatmeal, tell me. Why? I want to know if it was good. Next time I'll take you somewhere else. The call ended. Eleanor stared at the ceiling, the blanket pulled up to her nose, the windbreaker folded on the pillow beside her. The phone lit up again. A new message. You can keep the jacket, for rainy days. And then another one came immediately after. If you get wet, you'll catch a cold. If you catch a cold, you can't finish the revisions. If you don't finish the revisions, you'll delay the project. So don't get wet. Eleanor looked at the message, which had taken such a long detour to express concern, and the smile on her face grew even wider. She turned to the other side and buried her face in the folded windbreaker. The smell of soap had faded, leaving only the scent of her own body heat that had warmed it all night. She closed her eyes. 3 years. For the first time in 3 years, she felt that being alone was no longer natural. 2 weeks later, the ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. When Eleanor received the invitation, she knew it was a trap. A New York charity gala. The organizer was the Association of New York Entrepreneurs, but the invitation read, Special guest, Miss Eleanor Vance. And the contact person listed was the personal secretary of Grayson's mother, Irina Croft. Kate turned the invitation over in her hands. Eleanor, this is clearly a setup. Maybe you shouldn't go? Not going would be a sign of weakness. Eleanor put the invitation in a drawer. She took her phone and texted Julian. Charity gala on Saturday night. I'm going. The reply came instantly. I know, Hayes checked. Irina Croft, Grayson's mother, is one of the main organizers. So you also think I shouldn't go? I didn't say you shouldn't. A pause. You go, I go. You weren't invited. An invitation is not required. Eleanor looked at those 5 words and put her phone down. Saturday, 7 p.m. The ballroom, crystal chandeliers shining like daylight. Round tables covered with dark red tablecloths, each with expensive floral arrangements. The attendees were the cream of the crop. Real estate tycoons, financiers, media owners, as well as some familiar faces from the world of materials science. At the entrance, the registrar, looking at her invitation, had a change of expression. Then, forcing a professional smile, he said, "Miss Vance, this way, please. Your table is number 18. Table number 18 was in the farthest corner of the hall, next to the kitchen door. Eleanor looked at the table number, said nothing, and sat down. She didn't know the people at the table. A regional representative of a jewelry brand, the wife of the owner of a small materials company, another lady who looked like someone's wife, but whose, it was unclear. Seeing Eleanor, they exchanged meaningful glances. Eleanor took a glass of mineral water from the table and took a sip, not joining the conversation. When the evening officially began, the host on stage read a list of sponsors and guests. After each name, there was applause. Eleanor's name was not mentioned. But she noticed that when the host announced the president of the Croft Metals Corporation, Grayson Croft, a middle-aged woman sitting at the main table opposite her, turned her head and looked at her. Irina Croft, Grayson's mother. In her 50s, well-maintained, in a burgundy suit, with an emerald necklace around her neck. Her gaze lingered on Eleanor for 2 seconds. The corners of her lips twitched, and she turned away. The look said clearly, "Good, you came." In the middle of the evening, the host announced a new item on the program. Speeches by outstanding representatives of the young generation of New York entrepreneurs. The first to take the stage was the son of a financial group head, who spoke for 3 minutes about charity. The second was the daughter of a construction company owner, who spoke for 5 minutes about a school she built in Africa. The third name made Eleanor's fingers tighten slightly. And now, we invite our next guest, Miss Eleanor Vance. Eleanor didn't move. She hadn't signed up for any speeches. The host on stage repeated, "Miss Eleanor Vance." Hundreds of eyes in the hall began to look around. Someone whispered, "Who is Eleanor Vance?" The one young Croft dumped. "What is she doing here?" Eleanor sat at her 18th table in the corner, with half a glass of mineral water in front of her. She didn't get up. The host's voice came for the third time, now with a hint of embarrassment. "Miss Eleanor, she's here." A clear female voice came from the main table. Irina Croft stood up, a glass of red wine in her hand, her smile elegant and appropriate. "Eleanor, don't be shy. This is a charity evening. Everyone came to share and connect. You are in materials science. Tell us about your journey in business. This is a wonderful opportunity." Silence fell in the hall for a second, then laughter broke out. Eleanor, holding the glass of water, looked up at Irina Croft, who was standing at the main table. "Mrs. Croft," she said. Her voice was quiet but clear. "I did not sign up for this speech." Irina Croft's smile didn't waver. "Oh, that's our oversight, as organizers. We forgot to inform you. But since you're here, why not say a few words? The industry titans are gathered here. They are very supportive of the young." She turned her head slightly, as if adding casually, "Of course, if Eleanor feels that her career is not yet worth talking about, then we won't insist." Someone in the hall laughed. Not loudly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. Eleanor put down the glass of water and slowly stood up. She didn't go to the stage. She remained standing at her place, facing Irina Croft and the entire main table. "Mrs. Croft, what exactly do you want me to talk about?" she asked. Irina Croft's smile widened. "Tell us about your career. You have a small workshop, right? Tell us how hard it is for young people to start from scratch." "Start from scratch," Eleanor repeated those words. "Yes." Irina Croft looked around, raising her voice so the whole hall could hear. "Eleanor comes from a simple family. No connections, no resources. Everything she has achieved through her own hard work. Isn't this the spirit we should be encouraging at a charity evening?" Her tone was seemingly complimentary, but everyone present understood. Simple family, no connections, no resources. It was a reminder to everyone of Eleanor's station. "Mrs. Croft," Eleanor looked at her. "You don't really mean that, do you?" Irina Croft's eyelid twitched. "In what sense? You want to say, how dare I, a simple technician cast off by the Croft family, sit here? Is that right?" A dead silence fell in the ballroom. Irina Croft's smile froze for a moment, but she quickly composed herself. Eleanor, you're being too sensitive. I'm not being sensitive, Eleanor interrupted her. But since Mrs. Croft is so interested in my career, I can show you something. She bent down and took a folder from the bag by her chair. No need for the stage. Everyone will see it anyway. She opened the folder, took out the first document, a color printout, a 3 size. She unfolded it and placed it on the table. This is the notification of passing the technical selection for the federal project for the development of deep space alloys, she said. Sending Department, Defense Materials Division of the National Center, developer of the technical solution, Eleanor Vance. A pause. The materials specialists present here probably know about this project, one of the key directions of the federal program. The total development budget is $14 billion. Her gaze swept the hall and landed on Irina Croft's face. Mrs. Croft, do you think that the developer of a technical solution that passed selection for a $14 billion federal project, is that a significant enough achievement? Irina Croft's fingers tightened slightly on her wine glass, but she quickly regained her composure. Eleanor, you are certainly very capable, but… She turned to the whole hall, her smile returning. We all know that passing selection and getting a contract are different things. Besides, I heard that this project recently had its lead director changed. It became the Defense Materials Division of the National Center. She looked at Eleanor meaningfully. And as for Eleanor's relationship with that very lead specialist, Mr. Croft, I think everyone has heard about that, right? Someone in the hall let out a sympathetic chuckle. Exactly. I heard she latched onto that lead specialist, the uncle. Just got dumped and she already has a patron. Well, a young girl finding support is normal. The discussions grew louder. Grayson, sitting at the main table, smiled, his leg crossed over the other. He looked at Eleanor as if it were a pre-arranged performance. Beside him sat Marina Volkova, in a white dress, with exquisite makeup, a glass of champagne in her hand, smiling in Eleanor's direction. Eleanor stood her ground, waiting for the discussions to die down. Then she took a second document from the folder. Since Mrs. Croft mentioned the change of lead director for this project, Eleanor's voice was still even. I want to ask those present, does anyone know why Croft Metals was stripped of its qualification? No one answered. I'll tell you. Eleanor unfolded the second document. It was a 1-2-page report on the technical qualification check. Over the past 5 years, Croft Metals has participated in 7 projects related to the defense industry. In 4 of them, facts of technical data falsification were identified. The actual developer of the core algorithm did not match the one claimed. She turned to the last page of the report and pointed to the numbers. In all 4 projects, Marina Volkova was claimed as the key developer. The actual developer, she looked up, in all cases was me. A dead silence fell in the hall. Grayson's leg dropped. The champagne glass in Marina Volkova's hand swayed slightly. This report was compiled by the Technical Oversight Department of the National Center, Eleanor continued. Not at my request, and not at anyone's personal direction. It is the result of an automatic check of historical data in the system, which was initiated when Croft Metals submitted its application for the Deep Space Project. She looked at Irina Croft. So, Mrs. Croft, the change of lead director did not happen because I know someone. It happened because Croft Metals' technical documentation does not stand up to scrutiny. Irina Croft's face finally changed. Not just changed, but turned white. She turned and looked at Grayson. Grayson was already on his feet. His fists were clenched white, his lips tightly pressed together. Eleanor, he hissed through his teeth. This report, where did you get it? Eleanor looked at him. From open sources. Impossible. This is an internal. He suddenly fell silent, because he realized he had spoken out of turn. By saying, internal, he had admitted the report's authenticity. Eleanor didn't pursue the topic. She took a third document from the folder. And this, she said, is the initial manuscript of the algorithm derivation for the project on testing alloys in extremely cold conditions, year 2021. Developer Andrew Vance. My father. She spread the manuscript on the table. And this, she took out another printout of the same size, is the same project, the algorithm model stored in the Croft Metals internal system, the same project number, the same date. She placed the 2 documents side by side. What's the difference? In the original, the ultimate failure limit in extreme cold is -42 degrees. In the archived version, it's -65. Because of this altered parameter, the test chamber was built with the wrong formula. She looked up. 3 months later, the chamber collapsed. My father died. Not even a breath could be heard in the ballroom. Who did it? Eleanor's gaze was fixed on Grayson's face. Only 4 people had access to the encrypted data in the Croft Metals internal system. Grayson, you are one of them. Grayson's lips trembled. You're lying! The ballroom entrance doors suddenly flew open. Not just opened, but were forcefully pushed open with 2 hands. The metal hinges let out a heavy creak. Everyone turned. On the threshold stood 4 men in dark blue uniforms, with radios on their belts. They parted, forming a path. Julian emerged from the passage. Today he was in an official suit. A dark black 3-piece suit, a white shirt buttoned all the way up. On his chest, the pin of the National Center. A silver shield with an emblem and olive branches. His steps, his shoes on the marble floor, echoed through the hall. Step by step, the rhythm was perfect. Grayson's face went from white to gray. Julian walked straight to Eleanor and stood beside her. Then he turned to face the entire hall. I, Julian Croft, lead specialist of the Defense Materials Division of the National Center. His voice was not loud, but every word was clearly heard in every corner of the hall. I am not here today to eat. He looked at Hayes. Hayes quickly came from the entrance, a document in his hands. This is an investigation warrant, issued jointly by the Technical Oversight Department of the National Center and the Federal Office for Scientific Ethics, Julian said, regarding the Croft Metals Corporation in the case of technical data falsification in defense projects. Grayson Croft, as the legal representative and project lead from Croft Metals, is subject to questioning from this moment. His gaze finally moved to Grayson. He is forbidden to leave the city during the investigation. Grayson's knees buckled, not of his own will. His legs simply couldn't hold him anymore. Uncle, It wasn't my doing, it was all the subordinates. Grayson, Eleanor spoke. Everyone looked at her. She stood next to Julian, her gaze calmly fixed on Grayson. You just said I was lying. Now, look at these 2 sets of data. Look at the report on falsification in 4 projects. Look at this spectacle your mother arranged. She paused. Say 1 sentence to everyone present. Grayson's legs trembled. Say what to say. Say that Eleanor Vance's father died on a Croft Metals project, and Croft Metals owes him a life. That you, Grayson Croft, owe him an answer. I can't say that. Eleanor's voice didn't get louder. Then I'll offer you a choice. Either you say it now, or tomorrow when the people from the office come, you'll say it in the interrogation room. Grayson's legs finally gave out. He stumbled backward, knocking his chair over as he slumped onto the floor, clutching his head in panic. The loud crash echoed in the quiet hall. It wasn't me, his voice trembled. I didn't kill Eleanor's father, I didn't know. Save it for the federal agents, Eleanor said, her voice piercing through his pathetic display. I'm ruined. Grayson's voice broke into a frantic sob, his eyes wide with pure terror. My life is over. In the hall, with several hundred people, there was not a single voice. Irina Croft, standing at the main table, dropped her wine glass, which shattered. The red liquid spread across the floor. There was not a drop of blood on her face. Marina Volkova also put down her glass. Her fingers gripped the edge of the tablecloth, her knuckles white. Julian stood beside Eleanor. He hadn't said a word in her defense. Only now did he look down at the trembling, pathetic figure of Grayson. And he spoke. His tone was even, as if he were talking about something completely unimportant. Grayson, slumped on the floor, looked up. The person standing before you. Julian's gaze moved from Grayson to Eleanor's face, lingered for a second, and then returned to Grayson. Is my fiancé. It was as if something exploded in the hall. But it was not a sound. It was a collective held breath. From today, Julian said, all of New York will know this. His gaze swept the hall. Hundreds of faces under the crystal chandeliers. Shocked, scared, disbelieving. Finally, his gaze returned to Grayson. Haven't you greeted her? 3 words, spoken lightly, but they sounded like a knife being driven into Grayson's head. Grayson, paralyzed on the floor, was as if hollowed out. His lips moved, but he couldn't form a single coherent sound. How to greet her? Irina Croft suddenly shrieked. But as soon as she said it, she realized her mistake. The answer was too obvious. Julian was Grayson's uncle. Julian's fiancée was Grayson's aunt. The very woman he had publicly cast aside, humiliating her with $500,000, disrespecting her late father, his aunt. A sound finally broke out in the hall. Not applause. A collective sigh of relief. Eleanor looked down at Grayson for 2 seconds. Then she bent down and, one by one, put the documents back into the folder. Her movements were unhurried, as if she were putting away ordinary work materials. Julian, she put the folder away and turned to him. Yes. Let's go. Julian looked at her, and the corners of his lips twitched. It wasn't a smile, but something warmer. He turned and, taking a half step back, let her pass. Eleanor walked past Grayson. The heels of her shoes clicked on the marble floor, clear and even. Behind her remained a broken Grayson, a weakened Irina Croft, and several hundred New York celebrities who didn't dare to breathe. Passing the exit, Julian took a dark coat from Hayes. Not a windbreaker. A perfectly tailored cashmere coat, and draped it over Eleanor's shoulders. It's windy outside. An autumn wind. Eleanor, wrapped in the heavy coat, descended the hotel steps. Behind her, the brightly lit ballroom. In front, the quiet hum of a black van's engine. She got into the car. Julian sat next to her. The door closed. Eleanor exhaled deeply. Your hands are shaking. Julian's voice came from beside her. Eleanor looked down. Indeed. The hand clutching the folder was trembling slightly. She placed the folder on her lap and pressed her hand on top. Did you prepare all those words in advance? The data and reports, yes, I got them a week ago. But the words, that was improv. Today. So, when you got the invitation, you already knew what they were planning? I had a feeling. Why didn't you tell me? Eleanor turned to him. Because I wanted to say it myself. Julian was silent for 2 seconds. Next time. I know, Eleanor interrupted him. Next time I'll tell you. Julian looked at her. In the darkness, it was hard to see his expression, but Eleanor felt the weight of his gaze. Eleanor. Yes. You were magnificent today. 3 words from the man who held the highest authority for approving scientific developments in the country weighed more than any long speech. Eleanor turned to the window. The city lights sped by. Her hands were no longer shaking. 3 days after the banquet, at 1 in the morning, Julian's phone rang. Eleanor, waking from the vibration, answered. Did something happen? Julian's voice was low, hoarse from long hours of work. What? At the Croft Metals Northwest base, there's another operational test line, a line for the mass production of cryogenic alloys. The algorithm model used is the one signed by Marina Volkova. Eleanor sat up, leaning against the pillow. Tonight at 9, the 3rd batch of test samples failed in the simulation chamber at a temperature of -48 degrees. The entire line has been shut down. Eleanor's fingers gripped the blanket. Casualties? There were no people in the chamber. It's an automated line. But when the samples failed, they breached the chamber's insulation. There was a liquid nitrogen leak from the cooling system. The base urgently evacuated 3 adjacent experimental zones. Over 170 people were evacuated at night. Eleanor closed her eyes. The failure limit. Yes, Julian's voice was even. In the model signed by Marina Volkova, the extreme cold failure limit was stated as -65 degrees. The actual failure occurred at -48, a difference of 17 degrees. Because her model is a copy of my initial structure, but with altered parameters. Eleanor's voice was quiet. She doesn't understand the relationship between the decay coefficient and the temperature gradient in the recursive formula. She only knows how to change the numbers on the surface. At room temperature, it's not noticeable, but at extremely low temperatures, everything falls apart. 2 seconds of silence. Eleanor. Yes? The nature of this incident is different now. I know. A military test line, a project with a secret classification. The accident resulted in the loss of state property and created a security threat. This is no longer technical data falsification. This is a criminal offense. Eleanor opened her eyes and looked at the dark ceiling. Does Grayson know? The base immediately reported to the National Center. I have already signed the warrant for the accident investigation. And, Grayson, Julian paused. He's on the run. After the banquet, he started moving assets. Tonight, when the news of the accident reached New York, his people tried to erase the data in the central server room on the 7th floor of Croft Metals. Eleanor's back tensed. Did they succeed? They did, Julian said. The server room was copied by my people 3 days ago. He was erasing an empty shell. The real data is already on a secure server at the National Center. Eleanor's hands relaxed their grip on the blanket. And one more thing, Julian continued. Encryption level 5 has been broken. Eleanor's breath caught. What's there? Complete technical data on all defense-related projects that Croft Metals has carried out over the past 8 years, including the complete archive of your father's project. Records of data changes, system login logs, timestamps, it's all there. And the perpetrator? Confirmed. Julian's voice became heavy. The data on your father's project was changed from an account belonging to William Croft. Eleanor closed her eyes. William Croft, Grayson's father. But, Julian continued, the login was at 2:17 a.m. At the same time, William Croft's cell phone was at a resort 200 miles away. Eleanor opened her eyes. Remote login. Yes, someone used his account for remote access. The technical team is now tracing the real IP address. The list of suspects is short. Only 2 people had remote access rights using William Croft's account. Eleanor waited. Grayson Croft and Marina Volkova. A week later, in the meeting hall of the National Center, a hearing on the accident. Everyone was there. The Technical Oversight Department of the National Center, the Federal Office for Scientific Ethics, the Defense Security Review Group, and 2 prosecutors. Eleanor sat in the witness chair, a glass of water in front of her. Grayson and Marina sat in the defendants' chairs. Grayson had lost weight in a week. His suit hung on him, his cheekbones were more prominent, his eyes sunken. But he still held his back straight, with a stubbornness that couldn't be broken even in a trap. Marina sat beside him, in a simple suit, without her usual exquisite makeup. Her fingers were clasped on the table, the tips slightly white. The lead investigator read the main conclusions of the accident investigation report. Failure of the 3rd batch of test samples on the mass production line for cryogenic alloys at the Croft Metals Northwest base. Direct cause of the accident. An error in the calculation of the decay coefficient in the algorithm, which led to a serious discrepancy between the claimed and actual material failure limit. The developer of this algorithm model is Marina Volkova. The Technical Commission of the National Center confirmed that the structure of the algorithm signed by Marina Volkova is 100% based on the initial manuscript of Eleanor Vance, but the key parameters were unlawfully altered, and these changes contain fundamental scientific errors. The investigator looked up at Marina. Marina Volkova, what can you say about these conclusions? Marina's lips moved. I made optimizations based on Eleanor's work. It's not plagiarism, it's a joint development. A joint development? The investigator opened a document. Eleanor Vance's 234-page manuscript. Timestamps from March 2020 to November 2022. Your first signed article was published in December 2022. Please tell us, what was your collaboration during the 2 years and 8 months while Eleanor independently performed all the derivations? Marina's fingers tightened. I was responsible for the experimental verification. Experimental verification? Eleanor spoke. Everyone looked at her. Marina, Eleanor's voice was even. You say you were responsible for the experimental verification. Then I'll ask you one question. Marina looked at her, her throat tightening. What is the convergence condition for the 3rd term of the expansion in the recursive decay formula for extreme cold? Marina's eyes blinked. What? The convergence condition for the 3rd term of the expansion in the algorithm model you signed. You wrote it yourself, you should know. Marina's mouth remained open. 3 seconds. 5. No sound. I'll tell you. Eleanor took a sheet of paper from the folder on the table. The convergence condition is the ratio of the temperature gradient to the stress coupling coefficient, which must be less than 0.73. This number was not derived mathematically. It is an empirical value that I obtained based on 427 series of experiments. She put the sheet back. This number is on page 117 of my initial manuscript. In your article, it is simply cited, without derivation. Because you don't know where it came from, you only know that it is 0.73. Marina's face turned white. Therefore, when you were making optimizations, Eleanor continued, you changed the decay coefficient from 0.73 to 0.91, because you thought that the larger the number, the better the material's characteristics. But in reality, the larger the decay coefficient, the faster the material degrades in extreme cold. You got the direction of the safety margin wrong. Silence fell in the hall for 5 seconds. The investigator looked at Marina. Do you have any explanation? Marina's lips trembled. She looked at Grayson. Grayson wasn't looking at her. Marina Volkova, the investigator's voice became sterner. The Technical Oversight Department of the National Center has established that in the deep space and cryogenic alloy projects, you have committed serious violations of scientific ethics. You passed off others' research as your own, applied for federally funded research projects, which led to the implementation of flawed technical solutions in production and caused a major accident. Given that the accident occurred on a project with a secret classification, your case is being transferred to the federal prosecutor's office. Marina's body slumped back as if pushed. The investigator turned to Grayson. Grayson Croft, legal representative of the Croft Metals Corporation. Grayson looked up. In the process of Marina Volkova's scientific fraud, Croft Metals applied for 4 defense projects, providing false information about the developers. Your signature is on all the applications. I didn't know, Grayson began in a hoarse voice. I didn't know her algorithm was plagiarized. I thought she... You thought... The investigator opened another document. In December 2022, on the same day Marina Volkova's first signed article was published, the Croft Metals internal system recorded that your administrator account deleted all records of Eleanor Vance's participation in the projects. Grayson's fingers dug into the edge of the table. You didn't know it was plagiarism, but you knew that the actual developer was Eleanor. You intentionally deleted the records of her participation to clear the way for Marina. Grayson's mouth remained open, unable to say anything. Furthermore, the investigator turned to the next page. Regarding the encrypted Level 5 data in the Croft Metals central server room, Grayson's body visibly tensed. This level of data was encrypted with a military-grade protocol. The technical team, after decryption, confirmed. It contained full backup copies of key technical data for all defense projects that Croft Metals had carried out over the past 8 years. The rights to encrypt this data belong to your father's account, William Croft, but on the 14th of February 2021, at 2:17 a.m., the same time that the data for Andrew Vance's project was falsified, the actual IP address of the login to this account points to the central server room on the 7th floor of Croft Metals headquarters. And at the same time, your father was at a resort 200 miles away. The investigator looked at Grayson. Remote access to William Croft's account. Data falsification. The IP address, after tracing, has been confirmed. It belongs to the computer terminal in your office. Grayson's face completely lost its color. No, it wasn't me. The terminal has a fingerprint scanner, the investigator said. The login logs retained information about fingerprint verification. Forensic examination confirmed. The fingerprint belongs to Marina Volkova. All eyes turned to Marina. Marina's body shrank in her chair. From the terminal in your office, from your father's account, by Marina Volkova's hands, the investigator closed the document. The correct data submitted by Andrew Vance was falsified. The extreme cold failure limit was changed from -42 degrees to -65. 3 months later, the chamber collapsed. Andrew Vance died. The two of you, one provided the access and opportunity, the other carried it out. Together, you form the complete chain of data falsification. Grayson's hands lay on the table, all 10 fingers trembling. This is not a technical dispute, the investigator stood up. This is suspicion of intentional falsification of defense-related data, indirectly leading to the death of a Bureautam Bureau, Bureaustablade, Bureauteam Funds Fundsfication of defense-related data. From this moment, Grayson Croft and Marina Volkova are being handed over to the FBI and the Department of Justice for investigation. The hearing room door opened, and 2 court officers entered. Grayson, looking at the approaching officers, suddenly turned to Eleanor. Eleanor! His voice broke. Eleanor sat in the witness chair, her gaze calm. She was silent. An officer approached Grayson. Grayson Croft, please come with us. Grayson's legs buckled as he stood up. The officer supported him by the arm. Not supported, but grabbed. With Marina, it was even simpler. She didn't even resist. Her body, as if boneless, was lifted from the chair by the officers. When they were led out of the hearing room, and the door closed behind them, Eleanor exhaled deeply. She looked down at her hands, lying on the table. Even, stable, not trembling. People in the room began to leave. The lead investigator approached her and shook her hand. Miss Vance, thank you. If additional testimony is required, we will contact you. All right. Eleanor gathered her documents and stood up. Leaving the hearing room, she saw Julian. He was standing, leaning against the wall opposite. He hadn't been at the hearing. He had been outside the whole time. Seeing her, he straightened up. Is it over? It's over. The verdict? Not yet. Hand it over to the military prosecutor. A case has been opened. Julian nodded. They walked together down the hallway. You in there, Julian began. Yes? You asked her about the convergence condition. Yes, 0.73. 427 series of experiments. I know. When you first told me in the pavilion that you had sent that algorithm, I read all your published articles. That number was in the appendix to your 2021 article. Eleanor stopped and turned to him. You even read the appendices to my articles? I did. Then you know what else was written there? In the acknowledgments section, you wrote one sentence, dedicated to my father, Andrew Vance. I hope that in heaven, he will see these numbers finally fulfill their purpose. Eleanor's steps faltered. She didn't expect him to remember that. Julian stood beside her, not looking at her. He was looking out the window at the end of the hallway. Outside was the courtyard of the National Center, the autumn ginkgo leaves covering the ground. They have, he said. What's they have? Those numbers, Julian finally turned to her. They have fulfilled their purpose. Eleanor looked at him. The tip of her nose tingled for a moment. But only for a moment. She nodded. Yes, they have. They walked on. Julian's hand hung at his side. After a couple of steps, his fingers brushed her hand. Very lightly, as if by accident. But Eleanor didn't pull away. She reached out her hand and intertwined her fingers with his. Julian's hand tightened. They walked on like this, side by side, out of the National Center building. 3 days later, the Department of Justice officially announced the results of the investigation. Grayson Croft was suspected of intentional falsification of defense-related data, providing access and opportunity, fraud to obtain federal funds, which led to a major accident and the death of a person. Based on the totality of the crimes, the case was transferred to a federal court. Marina Volkova was suspected of direct execution of defense-related data falsification, scientific fraud, and appropriation of others' research to obtain federal projects, which indirectly led to an accident and the death of a person. Based on the totality of the crimes, the case was transferred to a federal court. William Croft, although his account was used without his knowledge, was found guilty of concealing information and subsequent obstruction of justice. A separate case was opened against him. The Croft Metals Corporation was stripped of all its licenses for defense projects, and bankruptcy proceedings began. That same day, in the afternoon, Eleanor's phone received a message from Kate. Eleanor, the news is out. Grayson and Marina have been officially arrested. The entire internet is buzzing. Another one followed. All those on my social media who used to write that you were clinging to the rich have deleted their comments. Some are even writing to me privately, asking if they can collaborate with you. Heh. Eleanor looked at that. Heh, and the corners of her lips twitched. She replied with one word, yes. Then she opened her chat with Julian. The last message was from him this morning. What are your plans? She had replied, waiting for news. Now she typed a new line and sent, the news is out. They've been arrested. The reply came instantly. I know, the judge just signed the arrest warrant. Eleanor stared at the message for 3 seconds. Then she typed another line. Julian. Yes. Can my father's case be considered closed now? The other end was silent for 5 seconds. On a legal level, yes. The verdict will be within a month. And you? Eleanor looked at those 2 words. And you? He wasn't asking about the case. He was asking about her. She thought for a long time and finally typed 3 words. I made it. After sending it, she put her phone down and walked to the window. Outside, it was deep autumn. The streets of New York were covered with golden ginkgo leaves. On the coffee table was the same photograph. Her father in a hard hat, smiling so wide his eyes were mere slits. Dad, she whispered, it's over. Her phone lit up. A message from Julian. Are you free tonight? I want to tell you something in person. Eleanor looked at the screen. I'm free. Good. 7 o'clock. At the old place. The old place, that pavilion at the estate. The place of their first meeting. Eleanor put her phone down. She didn't know what he wanted to say. But she knew. From today, the stone that had been weighing on her heart for years was finally gone. She would no longer have to walk the rest of the path alone. 3 months later, the National Medal of Technology and Innovation ceremony. The Grand Ballroom. Eleanor Vance's name was on the list of recipients of the nation's highest honor for technological achievement. Project. Core Algorithm and Formulation System for Deep Space Alloys in Extreme Cold Conditions. The award ceremony took place in the Grand Hall. The leading scientists of the country in materials, science, academics, professors, directors of major research institutes were present, as well as people whose names Eleanor had previously seen only on the covers of textbooks. She sat in the 3rd row. Next to her was Kate, whose palms were sweating from excitement. Eleanor, if they call you to the stage, Have you prepared a speech? No. Not at all? Kate, we'll figure it out later. The awards reached the highest honor for technological achievement. The host announced the name of the project, showed a brief description of the technology, and then opened the envelope. The recipient of this year's National Medal of Technology and Innovation is the Project Core Algorithm and Formulation System for Deep Space Alloys in Extreme Cold Conditions. The author, Eleanor. Vance. Applause broke out. Kate next to her clapped so hard her eyes turned red. Eleanor stood up and walked to the stage. The spotlights illuminated her. Thousands of eyes in the hall were on her. She took the award, a crystal base with a gold medal in the shape of a heart. The host handed her the microphone. Miss Vance, please, your word. Eleanor looked at the hall. Her gaze swept over everyone. The industry titans, the journalists, her fellow scientists. In the fifth row by the aisle sat a man in a dark suit, Julian. He sat just as he did at all other events, back straight, face emotionless. But his gaze was fixed on her. Eleanor looked away and looked at the microphone. Thank you, she said. I want to share a story with you. The hall fell silent. Years ago, at one of the Northwest bases, there was a test line for alloys for extreme cold. The algorithm model submitted by the contractor contained a gross error. The extreme cold decay parameters were underestimated by 4 orders of magnitude. If they had started mass production based on this model, the first batch of samples at -50 degrees would have lasted no more than 3 months before failing. She paused. I saw that flawed data then. I knew it was wrong. Because 5 years earlier, my father had done the same. In another project, he discovered falsified data, submitted a correct report, and then that report was swapped. The tests were conducted with the flawed data. The chamber collapsed. My father died. In the hall with several thousand people, not even a breath could be heard. So years ago, when I saw the same signature, the same flawed data in another project, I wrote a corrected algorithm model and sent it anonymously. She looked at the fifth row. The person who received this model was the lead specialist of the National Center, Julian Croft. He used this model to prevent the production of flawed samples. The lives of 17 people on that test line were saved. Whispers began in the hall. That same lead specialist searched for me for 3 years. Eleanor's voice was even, but each word fell into the silence of the hall. I didn't know he was looking for me. I only knew that I had done the right thing. She looked down at the award in her hand. Today's award, I think, is not just for this project. It is for all those who, remaining in the shadows, did the right thing, adhered to the right standards, paid their price, but about whom no one knows. She looked up, including my father, Andrew Vance. Applause broke out, not polite, but the kind that slowly grew from the silence, becoming louder, with a kind of heavy acknowledgement. Eleanor stood on the stage, in the spotlight. She didn't smile. She just looked at the hall, watched as the academics stood and applauded, watched as Kate in her seat cried with happiness, watched as in the fifth row that same man in a dark suit stood up. Julian stood and clapped slowly, measuredly. His expression hadn't changed, no excitement, no extra emotions. But there was light in his eyes. When Eleanor returned to her seat, Kate grabbed her hand. Eleanor, you're so amazing, you know that? Kate, don't wrinkle my dress. Her phone vibrated. A message from a familiar number. After the ceremony, leave through the back door. I'll be there. The ceremony ended. Eleanor left through the back door. Julian's car was there. He stood, leaning against the car, hands in his pockets. Seeing her, he straightened up. Eleanor walked over to him, still holding the award. Did you see? He asked. I saw. I told the story from years ago. I know. You're not angry? Why would I be angry? Because I didn't warn you that I would talk about it on stage. Julian looked at her, silent for 2 seconds. Eleanor. Yes. You didn't send that algorithm to save me. You didn't know I would get it. Yes. You did it because you didn't want another person, like your father, to die because of flawed data. Yes. So it was always your business, not mine. How and where to talk about it is your right. Eleanor looked at him. You were in the hall today, she said. I saw you. You stood up and applauded. Yes. You never applaud. Julian didn't deny it. Eleanor moved the award from her right hand to her left. With her free right hand, she took his hand. Julian looked down at her hand, and then he squeezed it. Eleanor. Yes. Marry me. It wasn't a question. Eleanor looked at him. You said before that you wouldn't regret it. I did. And now? And now even less so. Eleanor's eyes became moist for a moment. Julian's other hand appeared from his pocket. There was something in his palm, a ring. A simple white gold ring, no diamonds, no embellishments. Eleanor looked closer. There was an engraving on the inside, a date, the 14th of July 2021, the day, years ago, when she wrote and anonymously sent the corrected algorithm. The tip of her nose tingled. Julian slipped the ring onto her ring finger. "From this day," he said, "and for all the days to come." Eleanor looked down at the ring, simple, unadorned. But that date inside made it more precious than any diamond. She looked up. "Julian." "Yes. I don't regret it either." His hand tightened, and then she stood on her tiptoes and touched her forehead to his. They stood on the steps of the back entrance. Above their heads, a sign read, "Emergency exit, glowing green." Unromantic. But it was enough. A month later, a wedding at a country house. The wedding was small, no invitations sent out, no dozens of tables, only Lawrence Croft, Kate, Hayes, and a dozen of Julian's old colleagues from the National Center. Eleanor was in a white dress. Not a lavish wedding dress with embroidery. A simple, elegant velvet dress with a row of small buttons on the collar. Julian was in an official suit. A dark black three-piece suit, a white shirt, and on his chest, the pin of the National Center. The ceremony took place in the grand hall of the estate. Lawrence Croft sat at the head, leaning on his cane, and looked at them, standing side by side. He smiled so wide his eyes were barely visible. "Good," the old man said. "Good." He said only one word, but twice. Eleanor nodded to the old man. Julian, standing beside her, also bowed his head slightly. "Child." The old man took her hand and patted it. "From this day on, you are not alone." Eleanor's eyes became moist. "I know," she said. After the ceremony, 2 tables were set up in the courtyard. The old colleagues started to joke and try to get Julian drunk. Julian accepted every glass. He didn't usually drink. But today, he drank every one to the bottom. Kate sat next to Eleanor and whispered, "Eleanor, how many has Mr. Julian had already?" "His 7th glass." "Does he usually drink?" "No." "Why today?" "Because he's happy." Kate looked at Eleanor's profile. She was smiling. Not the restrained, polite smile from before. A real smile. Her eyes were laughing, her lips curved, her whole body relaxed. A commotion started in the courtyard. Julian was being pushed towards Eleanor. There was a slight blush on his face. It was unclear whether it was from the wine or something else. He came and stood before her. Behind him, everyone was shouting, "Kiss! Kiss!" Julian looked at her. Eleanor looked at him. Scared? She raised an eyebrow. The corners of Julian's lips twitched, and then he bent down and quickly kissed her on the forehead. A burst of laughter and applause erupted from behind. Eleanor's ears burned, but she didn't pull away. That evening, in the grand hall of the estate, the guests had left. In the courtyard, only 2 wrought iron lanterns and the ground, strewn with red petals, remained. It was unclear who had scattered them. Eleanor sat in a chair, her shoes off, barefoot on the stone floor. Julian sat opposite her. His jacket was off, the top button of his shirt undone, his sleeves rolled up to his forearms. They sat opposite each other. "Julian." "Yes." "From today, what will you call me?" Julian looked at her. "Eleanor." "No." He was silent for a second. "Wife." Eleanor's face burned, but she didn't look away. "Say it again." "Wife." This time his voice was quieter, with a hoarseness and tenderness she had never heard before. Eleanor stood up and, barefoot, walked over to him. He was sitting, she was standing. It was one of the few moments when she could look down on him. "Julian," he looked up at her, "you looked for me for 3 years." "Yes." "Thank you." "You're welcome," he said. "Thank you for agreeing to be my wife." Eleanor looked at him, and then she bent down and touched her forehead to his. In the grand hall of the estate, 2 floor lamps burned, casting a warm yellow light. Outside, there was a moon. A deep autumn moon, round and bright.